Chapter 1. Theo had been going back and forth on his decision all day. He wouldn't watch a man's legs dance from the drop of the gallows, nor would he watch his head roll from the guillotine. So why would he want to watch this? This was worse than an execution. It was premeditated public suicide. And it was all Theo's fault. And yet here he was. The crowd had already grown to a sickening size. Apparently no one else had suffered the doubts and hesitation that Theo had. They all wanted to be here. That was evident in the violin string-taut atmosphere that hung over them all. They stood packed together in the open field as if they were the blades of grass themselves. In the distance, the rolling green hills appeared empty in comparison. The crowd parted as they saw it was him trying to get through. Some lifted their chins in greeting or called out a word as he passed, but they were equally as many with the same quiet somberness showing in their eyes as Theo felt in himself. It felt wrong to see his friends and neighbors so quiet. When before had they ever gathered in such numbers without it becoming a party, a celebration? But there was no laughter and no music here today. Even the bright colors of their clothing felt wrong, as if such a rainbow should have been muted by their sorrow. At the front of the crowd, a young woman stood with brown skin as glossy as if it had been smoothed by a centuries-old current, and masses of wild hair that seemed to demand not to be touched. Next to her was a man who stood out from the brown-skinned people around him, not only because of his sickly grey pallor, but also because of his immense size. The pair caught Theo's eye as he approached, and gestured to the space they had left between them. Theo sighed. It almost annoyed him how well his friends knew him. They knew he would come. He's not said a thing yet, Iara told Theo as he reached her. Bede, her giant companion, said, He won't. He was never one for words. He'd always rather get his hands around somebody's neck than have a meaningful conversation. He shook his head in disapproval to make it clear which one of the two options he would prefer. There was a cloud of air like rotting citrus around him, the pungently sweet smell of decay. His slanted eyes sparkled above his full, round cheeks. For a dead man, he always seemed so full of life. Theo said nothing. As always, when he came to the borders of Zion, there were no words. There were just the gates. All along the horizon, a towering fence penetrated the sky. Its bars were ornate and intricate, with an air of delicacy. Sparkling white ivory intertwined with bone-colored horn, each as deadly as the other. The gates of horn and ivory, as the fence was commonly known, wrapped around the entire perimeter of Zion. On its other side, the land was again split in two, creating 3 enclosed celestial realms in total. The green grass of Zion's field stopped suddenly at the border of the realm, and on one side of the fence, it turned into sand, while on the other, it became rock. There seemed to be a shadow cast over both the other realms, although the same sun touched them as shone down on Zion. Theo shuddered, and only a second later a similar quiver ran through the crowd around him, as an old man stepped forward towards the gates, supporting himself on the arm of the muscular young man next to him. As one, the crowd stood up straighter. All except Theo, who hunched his shoulders down and felt himself grow small. He shouldn't have come. The muscular young man stood with his back to the gates, with his head held high. He must have felt Theo's gaze because he turned and fixed him with an icy blue-eyed stare that made him shudder. Theo forced himself to maintain eye contact as he shook his head once. It's not too late. Don't do it. If the other man got the message, he didn't show it. But he raised his head again as if to return to his private conference with the blue sky. Iara reached for Theo's hand and squeezed it encouragingly. You tried, she said softly, but it's better this way. She was right. This was his fault, but there was nothing more he could do. Theo tugged nervously at the ends of his short hair, which fell in dreadlocks to the top of his ears, and then, resigned, he met the gaze of the old man. He was fair-skinned, with two mismatched curling antlers protruding from the top of his head, one knobbly and beige like an exposed kneecap, the other smooth and pearlescent. They seemed heavy. The old man's back was bowed as if from the weight of them. His left eye was clouded over with apparent sightlessness, but he saw Theo clearly. The gatekeeper tapped his cane several times on the ground, and the crowd fell silent. Gods and goddesses of Zion, my lord Theo. The gatekeeper bowed so deeply in Theo's direction that his knees shook when he had to straighten again. In contrast to his fragile body, his voice was surprisingly strong, carrying all the way across the field and down to the river. As gatekeeper, I am honored to guide mortals through these here gates. Each night, as the people of our religion, the majority, line up before me, I am the one who lets them through to either the realm of dreams. He paused to let the audience's gaze wander to the sandy half of the landscape behind him, or the realm of nightmares. Like a swinging pendulum, the crowd's gaze moved again, this time accompanied by an irrepressible shudder as it settled on the stark and rocky terrain. The gatekeeper continued, or it is my honor to allow the mortals to pass a night of peace here in Zion, the realm of sleep. I am honored to be able to keep Zion and its inhabitants safe, in the same way I protect the inhabitants of all three realms by guarding these gates. And yet today I feel no honor in the duty that brings us to these gates. We are here today to bear witness to the departure of Salvador Minor, who, by his actions, has forfeited his right to remain here in Zion. He has revealed himself a traitor, an attempted murderer, and a coward. And his worst crime of all, in this land where mortals seek their brief reprieve and the dead find their eternal rest, Salvador Minor stands accused of disturbing the peace. An electric energy surged through the crowd as the crimes were listed before them. Jeers and taunts were thrown at the criminal from every direction. The gatekeeper turned to the muscular young man beside him. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Salvador? Silence. Fine. In that case, I am Salvador Minor, God of Justice. 13 years ago, I allowed myself to be tricked, blinded, put to sleep. I looked into the eyes of the All-Mother's murderer, and I didn't see him. Justice was not served. I looked into his eyes again today. Salvador's blue eyes brightened and ice became fire as he locked gazes with Theo. In the depths of his rage, Salvador's classical beauty was magnified, almost to the point of myth. His blonde hair shone, his muscles bulged, and Theo, who had long limbs, deep brown skin, and narrow features that made his eyes seem large and his face thin, felt small in comparison. Theo Major, Salvador continued, his roar deepening to a growl. Unnatural son, ambitious godling, to slay your own blood for her position and her power. He looked out at the wider crowd, who cowered away. A few days ago, I would have torn this traitor's throat out with my bare hands if you all hadn't stopped me. I would have woken every sleeper and reincarnated every duppy who prayed to him just so I could tear their throats out too. But you stopped me. Why did you stop me? Didn't you love the All-Mother like I did? Wasn't she your world, your goddess and your night? He held a hand up to the sky where the yellow sun burned down on all their backs. Salvador sniffed. I am Salvador Minor, god of vengeance. I will avenge her. Suddenly, Salvador's eyes filled with tears. Instead of in fear, the crowd shuffled back in embarrassment at the sight. Theo was squeezing Iara's hand much too tightly in his own, but he couldn't let go. The gatekeeper spoke again. Salvador Minor, you have admitted to disturbing the peace of the sleep realm. You have admitted to the attempted murder of the god of sleep, Theo Major. You have also admitted that you no longer believe in Theo's innocence in the unfortunate, mysterious, and unresolved death of his mother. Because of these three facts, you have decided that you no longer wish to be a citizen of Zion, and you have decided instead to join the realm of whichever major you now believe to be completely innocent in the All-Mother's death. You also understand that you will never be allowed back into Zion once you leave today. Is this all correct? Salvador nodded, not bothering to try to speak over the rising noise of the crowd. He's really leaving, Theo thought incredulously. Don't go, he blurted out, dropping Iara's hand and stepping forward. Iara and Bede quickly followed him, one on either side so they could get in the way if Salvador made any sudden moves. Theo tried to forget that they were standing there. As far as he was concerned, it was just him and Salvador talking now. Him and his old friend, who at one point had believed in him more strongly than anyone else. How would he be repaying him for that if he didn't try one last time to save him? You don't have to believe in me. Stay here, and I'll give you a place in Zion where no one will disturb you. Anything you want. But please don't go over there. They'll kill you. Please. It wasn't right for him to beg like this, out in front of all of his people. But he didn't care. If it meant he could save the life of one Zion, he didn't mind debasing himself in front of the rest. Salvador's lip curled into a distasteful snarl. I choose Dream Country. Theo's heart sank. The crowd broke into quick chatter, and for the first time the gatekeeper had to raise his voice to speak. So be it. I, Rogan Minor, god of these gates of horn and ivory, open your path. And, just like that, part of the fence reformed behind him to become a double-doored gate. Many in the crowd, who had never before seen the gates opened, gasped at the sight. Rogan lay a hand on each of the newly formed handles, and Theo suppressed a shudder at the sight of contact with the poisonous materials. But these were the same materials that grew inside the gatekeeper's own body and out of his scalp, and so, unaffected, he pulled on the handles. The movement whipped up a small wind that carried the sands of the other realm onto the grass of Zion. Salvador only stopped to spit at Theo's feet before stepping through the gates. Rogan reformed the horn and ivory behind him, and the crowd immediately began to disperse. Salvador was still visible on the other side, but no one cared to see where he would go or what would happen to him next. It was none of their concern anymore. He was no longer one of them. Theo was the only one who watched him climb the ridge of a large sand dune and disappear over the other side.